Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and start. We sent a search party out for our third speaker, so we're going to maybe change the order around if he hasn't shown up by the time we get there. Thanks for joining us for this session. So let's talk about mandates and policies. A mandate or a policy is really not going to be terribly effective unless you can really measure and enforce compliance. So people very often come up with these ideas. Here's a really good idea. Here's a goal. Let's create a new rule to achieve this. But very often they give little thought to the idea of, well, how are we actually going to make this happen? And because of that, you either end up with a policy that's completely toothless and basically ignored, or you get a policy that's really strictly followed, but at a great expense and a great effort. So today we're going to try and get a handle on the compliance issues surrounding policies on, that require either public or open access to research articles, get a sense of the size of the challenge, and some potential tools that can help us cope with it. And this map, I like this image, but it just shows a teeny tiny percentage of the current landscape as far as policies go. There's a paper that came out recently that lists the number of policies that they could find as 663, and that's a lot of policies to handle if you're a librarian tasked with keeping your institution, your authors, your researchers in compliance, or if you're a journal publisher and you really want to make sure all of your authors' best interests are being served. It's also an area we've been really focused on as we've built Chorus. Hopefully you're all familiar with Chorus, but just briefly, it's a not-for-profit cooperative effort to really build public access as well as compliance for these policies into the scholarly publishing process itself. One of our questions has been, can we create this sort of automated, centralized system that works across many policies that minimizes the workload for everybody involved? And as we did our first sort of pilot projects, even though we were only working, I should point out the group behind this is called CORE, C-H-O-R, Inc., and the U.S. part is to address the U.S. federal funding agencies as our first project. And as we did our first pilots, even though we were only working with 20 some odd U.S. funding agencies, we realized the enormity of the complexity that's involved here, because pretty much every paper we worked with had multiple funding sources and authors from multiple institutions and often people from multiple countries. So what we're talking about is not just that number 663. We're talking about sort of combinatorial arrangements of 663 different factors. So every paper has a lot of multiple policies that you're just going to have to track. I'm going to come back at the end and talk briefly about some of the tools that we're building with Chorus. But first, we're going to hear from today's speakers. Did we find Rob yet, or no? Okay. So Rob is going to come in at some point, and he's going to talk about what compliance means on a broad scale in the real world based on a study of what's been going on in the UK for the last year or two. Judy Russell will go first for us. Judy's a librarian at the University of Florida and is going to talk about what this sort of burden is like for a librarian at a research institution who's been tasked with covering compliance for the university. And then Roy Kaufman will talk about some of the tools that the Copyright Clearance Center is building to address some of the burdens. So I'll hand it over to Judy.